Today we are learning basketball with Gerald Bourguet. He covers the Phoenix Suns. How you doing today, Gerald?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. Excited to dive in. What's going on in Phoenix? A whole crazy summer. Kevin Durant is out. Bradley Beal is out. Jalen Green is in. They got some new centers in the fold, a whole new mix, a new coach. It's a whole new roster. You can find Gerald's work cover at PHNX_sports and Suns as the co-host of the Phoenix Suns podcast and a lead Suns writer for Phoenix Sports. So we got an expert on the team here ready to just kind of dive in and break down a little bit what direction this Phoenix Suns team is heading. The last few years, they've had arguably one of the more interesting offenses where they want to outscore you. At the very least, they had that identity of like, we have bucket getters. We're going to roll out some tough shot makers that can score with anyone. And on any given night, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal can outscore you. But that isn't the whole game of basketball, of the defense, the playmaking, the well-rounded things that kind of make great teams take that next leap. And I think a lot of these moves is what that kind of shows that maybe the full equation was not figured out quite yet. So they hit the reset button a little bit and remain strong around Devin Booker is our guy going forward. If anything is clear from this summer, is that Booker still wants to be here, and this is Booker's team for as long as he wants it to be, is kind of what I got from this summer. And is that after all these moves, all the dust settled, is that kind of the first takeaway for you as well for this team?
Yeah, I think it's been a summer of transformation, and you're right that Devin Booker is the cornerstone of the franchise still. He still very much wants to be here and build something here. The Suns very much want him to be the centerpiece of it. And it makes sense because as much as for the last 2 years, Kevin Durant was their best player, he's also, 7 years older than Devin Booker. You're not going to rebuild or retool around Kevin Durant at this stage. So they recognize that this big three era was a failure across the board, and they pivoted as quickly as they could. A lot of people are kind of wondering what direction they're going in. I think if you look at the moves that they made, the common themes are getting younger, bringing in some players that are established despite being a lot younger. If you look at Jalen Green and Mark Williams, both being 23, trying to rebuild through the draft, trying to put more of an emphasis on player development and get a lot of athletes, younger guys, more defensive minded. They want dogs is what they want, because the fight has been glaringly lacking over the last couple of years with this team that has, had more than enough talent to go a lot further than they did. They made the playoffs one year, got swept, and then last year they missed the play-in altogether. So for a team that had championship expectations in both of those seasons, they fell miserably short. And this summer was all about resetting, retooling without fully rebuilding so that they could potentially, in a year or two, get this thing back on the path towards contention before Booker's prime is over.
Yeah, and that's all a great way to put it. It feels like a whole new team in the sense that, like, I could pull up some stats just on last year's team, but I don't think the team necessarily, the identity is going to necessarily reflect a lot of this. But they were the stat that stood out as a team for them is they were the 13th best offense and 7th in shooting percentage, and also 11th in free throw rate. So just to they were scoring efficiently, doing what they do well. And I think that floor balance is ultimately what they couldn't find, what you're getting at. The dogs on defense, the young legs, the energy. And there were a couple of promising signs. Osa Iguodala, Ryan Dunn, I thought, showed some promise that, there's a reason they're still on the roster if they're trying to re-identify around the youth and that sort of project. Even some of the rookies that we'll hit on a little later, but Rasheer Fleming, another one of these guys that could bring some defensive intensity as well. And obviously, Khaman Maluach, who I'm going to try to get his name correctly pronounced out of nothing but respect. I love him as a player, and, I could read the heck out of his name. So one day I'll be able to say it out loud real well, too. But backing up just a little bit to the Kevin Durant trade and the Bradley Beal wave and stretch, I think there were some really high expectations here. I don't know what to make of Kevin Durant's career stint in this moment. How do you think Phoenix fans and the Suns will kind of remember their time with KD? Because obviously everyone wanted, to watch a contender. and maybe it didn't quite hit that level in the actual during the playoffs and the product for one reason or another. So how do you think KD gets remembered by the Suns fans here?
Probably not very well, and I think it's a pity because he's the best player to ever wear a Phoenix Suns jersey. He's not the greatest
Mm.
Sun of all time, obviously, but he is the best individual player who has ever worn the purple and orange. Um, and it's not all of his fault either, but I think his tenure, if you think back to when the Suns traded for Shaq and how Shaq was just an incredible player, but that stint was just remembered miserably. I think the Kevin Durant trade is an even worse version of that.
Mm.
Because
7 seconds or Shaq. I mean,
yeah, I mean, you had championship expectations with Kevin Durant coming in, and the first season that they were together, that half season, it was basically him and Book against the world. They made it to the second round. They took the Nuggets, who went on to win the title, to 6 games, which is more than anybody else took them. So the future was bright, but in how they built around those two, it just failed across the board. And so, again, this is not all Kevin Durant's fault. I think the way that they built around those two matters a lot more than things that people are going to bring up, like his attitude or his leadership or, his Twitter replies or whatever you want to look at. But it was not a good union here. And it's rough because I think he wanted to be embraced more by Suns fans. He wanted to finish his career out here. And it wasn't him that wanted to be dangled at the trade deadline this past year. But with Bradley Beal and the no trade clause that he had and the way that teams didn't want to take on his contract, their kind of only out was to trade Kevin Durant. And they should have gone about it a different way by talking with him about it at the trade deadline. But that whole tenure, the relationship between him and the fan base was fractured. It was not representative of what he could actually do on the court. And it's unfortunate because this era, when you trade for a Kevin Durant and make one of the biggest mid-season acquisitions in NBA history, you hope that it goes a lot better than it did. And instead, you're kind of having to hit the reset button. So no matter what they had gotten back in a Kevin Durant trade, realistically, you were always going to have to label it something of a failure because you were closing the door on a chapter that should have been a lot more promising.
Yeah, that really paints the picture that the roster construction really might have had as much to do with kind of the ups and downs and even having to move on from Kevin Durant. Like, let me ask you, do you think just bringing in Brad Beal in the first place is kind of what kind of trickled down ultimately led to, well, now we can't even move Brad Beal and the only out is KD. And on top of that, I I feel like the team identity really doubled down on like the scoring aspect of things, even especially highlighted by that Bradley Beal move itself. Like to me, that was the last thing this team needed because you have two of the toughest shot making, most reliable scorers who can also be high volume 3-point guys. Like in the whole league, you already have the scoring covered. So, maybe trying to build around those scores with more defense and playmaking and shooting and more of the role player type things, you would think is might have led to more winning, and instead they doubled down on the star power or tripled down on the star power with Bradley Beal and the score. And obviously he's not quite what he used to be, but in theory it's 3-star scores, but that doesn't always add up to a greater sum of its parts if they're not complementing each other on the court, if they're all trying to do kind of sort of some similar things and maybe even not getting the most out of some of their ancillary skills as well. So it's just an interesting thought around the team building and how kind of unlucky Kevin Durant has been on a handful of things that are out of his control with his career when it comes to like you highlighted the moment, like things were looking up with in that after that playoff run, D Book and KD in hand, what you have, and that one move might have kind of to bring in Beal might have kind of just reset everything to where now the only move left is to move on from KD now because no one wants to take Brad Beal in that no trade clause, which very few players even have to begin with. So credit to his agent and the players for being able to get that. But it kind of put the team in a hard spot as you're talking about. But that's just kind of what happened. We're trying to sum it up here, and the Suns are now moving on. They did choose a direction. They kind of took the sunk cost of all the picks and sending out Mikal Bridges back in the day and kind of the sunk cost of what could have been with this team. And they punted. You got to give the credit for at least that of they admitted they made a mistake and they have moved on to the next move, which, might be kind of a long-term move to take a few steps back before they can go forward. And so, when they did these moves, what does the immediate future kind of look like next year? We can hit on the coaching change. They hired Jordan Ott from Cleveland, brings some of his offensive strategy from Cleveland, who just had an amazing season with the Cavaliers, especially in the regular season where they won so many games. What has the response been so far to the coaching hire and kind of the signs of what the culture could look like going forward under a new coach?
Well, before we get to that, I want to go back to the Bradley Beal thing that you were talking about, because
Yeah.
I do think it's easy to label that as the big mistake, and it obviously was in hindsight. But at the time, Chris Paul couldn't stay healthy for a playoff run. They needed, it was basically Book and KD against the world, and Bradley Beal was the best player that realistically they could have acquired that summer. I think they could have waived and stretched Chris Paul and freed up the MLE. And if you look at the guys that went for the MLE that summer, the best guy they could have added was Dennis Schroeder. And maybe hindsight 2020, maybe you just need a point guard and you have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and you bring back, DeAndre Ayton and whatnot. I know for a fact that relationship between the Suns and DeAndre Ayton was not in a good place. And I think the fact that he was traded tells you a little bit about what Devin Booker and Kevin Durant thought of him and his ability to, be that anchor on a contender. So I do think, and Beal, it was basically a free agency pitch because he had that no trade clause and the Wizards were willing to move on from him. So he was meeting with teams, and none of those teams that were competing for his services, including Milwaukee, you don't go into competing for a guy like that and say, we'll take you, but you have to get rid of this no trade clause that you got from the Wizards. So that would have been a non-starter. It would have taken them out of it. And you can look back and say, well, then they should have been out of it because look at what happened next. But I think his inability to stay healthy was the biggest thing. I still wish we could have seen more of it, because it wasn't just that he missed an average of 29 games in his 2 seasons. It was the fact that it was on again, off again, on again, off again. It wasn't for a long stint where the team could build chemistry without him and then build it with him. It was just constantly in and out. So I think with Bradley Beal, that was obviously the move that when you look at how they built around Book and KD, everyone's going to point to. But at the time, I think that was reasonably the best player they could have acquired. And a lot of their skills, being able to play on or off the ball, should have worked better. I think part of it is also Frank Vogel and Mike Budenholzer did a really bad job when they were on the job. And Budenholzer was obviously objectively a lot worse. But I do think there is something to recognizing it was gone, pivoting how you have to do, even biting the bullet on the wave and stretch and moving forward. But to get back to your question about Jordan Ott, I think there is excitement about him based on what he was part of in Cleveland. A lot of people have identified him as kind of this cutting edge basketball mind who is, nobody's going to outwork him. He's always trying to identify the latest NBA trends and figure out how you can get ahead of the next one. And I think that bodes well for a team that the last 2 coaches were more established championship caliber coaches, obviously, who have found their way to success in the league, but were more reliant on that way and what had gotten them to that point than trying to prove themselves hungry, trying to be at the cutting edge of where the league is going to go next. So, he's talked a lot about wanting to lean into more player movement and cutting like they had in Cleveland. He's talked about, potentially dual big lineups. Obviously, Cleveland has the personnel for it with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. The Suns, we'll see about Khaman Maluach, if he can be part of that, about Oso Ighodaro, whether he can do that. But I think they have rim protection now between Mark Williams and Khaman Maluach, which is something they have not had since DeAndre Ayton was here, and his was kind of come and go. So they've got that, and that means that they can pressure out on the perimeter more. They've got the dogs for it with Dylan Brooks, Ryan Dunn, Rasheer Fleming. They've got length. They've got guys that are used to pounding on the wings and stuff like that. So I think they're going to be more aggressive defensively, a lot better than last year's 27th ranked defense, hopefully, just because they have that hunger and that identity they're trying to build. But I think Jordan Ott's going to do a lot better on both ends, despite having maybe a little bit less from a roster standpoint.
Yeah, and you can see it in the roster itself. Just it kind of feels a little more balanced on the on the just the personnel alone. Looking through the roster a little bit, like just looking at the roster, I see a good amount of defensive oriented guys in the front court, and a lot of guys that can hit the three ball in the backcourt. And between Jalen Green and Devin Booker, and now Kobe Bray also, you have some real shooters in there, and obviously there will be kind of a more pecking order. Like I think the first question is who's running point guard? Are we running a traditional point guard offense? Is it going to be Devin Booker running point and more of a scorer first, but also create for the team type of offensive engine? Do touches look more heliocentric with him running 30 or 40 plays a game? Or will maybe with Jalen Green there, will it be a little more off-ball movement, like you're getting at with maybe Jalen Green and Devin Booker are flying off screens like every other play, and now you have that shooting gravity of their off-ball gravity as used as a way to open up the defense and playing more of like a shooter, like hunting for shooters at through the front court playmaking, and that brings me to Khaman as well. I think he's probably the biggest X factor in all of this. The rookie to me, Khaman Maluach. I mean, he's an incredible defender, incredible rim roller. The Suns are getting the most efficient rim roller ever. I think it was 70 in college basketball history. I think he hit like 72, somewhere between like 75, 80% of his shots at the rim. He made all of them. Like he was just an automatic rim roll threat. But he'll get some critiques here and there for little things like, are his hands better on the lob, but not as good underneath the basket? Maybe he gets a little fumbly down there. Versus on defense, one of the things that stood out to me were his hands, how active they were, and just kind of in the smart placement of it all, of like keeping one on the body, one on the one for the contest when he's down low, and just a smart player down there who can bring the defensive, be something of a defensive anchor, who can rim roll, rim protect. And what I want to ask is, what were you thinking on draft night when right before they draft this player, just a few picks before, then they trade for Mark Williams, another rim rolling, rim protecting center. And on top of it all, there isn't necessarily a clear lob thrower, like a clear like playmaker to set these guys up. So what were your thoughts on draft night when all that goes down? You bring in both of these centers. Do you think that they provide now, like you say, two rim protectors, so you get a double set of depth, so you're not really worried about opportunity? Or do you think, one might limit the opportunity of the other?
I think when you first got the notification that, like, okay, because the Mark Williams trade literally came in like right around the 9th overall pick, and then you knew that Maluach would be there at 10, who was their guy. He was like the ideal. If he's still there at 10, you take him, no questions asked. So you get that first notification, you're like, are they trading Maluach? Are they are they rerouting him? What's going on here? And honestly, for me, once you think about it for more than a few seconds, you're like, okay, this makes sense, because Mark Williams has never played more than 44 games in a season. And Maluach, as much as I like him and I think he's got a high ceiling, he's going to take some time. He's an 18-year-old project. Like he's only been playing basketball for 4 or 5 years, whatever it's been. And you saw at Summer League, he struggled a little bit. He struggled with the physicality. They put him in situations that maybe he's not going to always be in. They put the ball in his hands and had him do some handoffs and things that, he was getting bumped off his line a little bit. I don't know that he'll do that as much with the actual Suns team. I think they wanted to experiment and see what he could do. The 3-ball, he was shooting it. It wasn't falling to the rate that you kind of hope to see, but all of this just lends itself to, he's going to be a little bit of a project. You mentioned the hands, fumbling the ball a little bit on rebounds, contested alley-oops. He wasn't as good about corralling those and finishing those. So I think it's going to take some time. So I think both of those guys guard a little bit against the other's weaknesses, with Mark Williams being availability and Maluach as being like, we can't turn this over to a rookie center who's going to take some time just yet. And they also have Nick Richards still to kind of mitigate both of those potential shortcomings for each of those guys. So if Mark Williams goes down and misses half the season, at least you've got Nick Richards there, who's a proven NBA veteran. He's not fantastic. He's more of a backup caliber big, but he can fill in. And Maluach, you can kind of take your time with his development and not rush it and not put too much on his shoulders too early. So I was kind of, after I thought about it, I was kind of a fan of what they did, because you can never have too much rim protection. You can never have too much rim running. And Devin Booker needs that in a pick and roll partner. He's not, the best lob thrower, but he is a good pick and roll player, and he's one of the more underrated playmakers in the league. The question is, are you going to have enough outside of him? Because Jalen Green historically has not been a great playmaker. Colin Gillespie is a solid point guard, but he's kind of the only other actual point guard you have on your roster. So that's going to be interesting, because Mark Williams and Khaman Maluach, 90% of their offense is going to come in pick and rolls, dump offs around the basket, in the paint. I think Mark Williams last year only took like 9 shots outside of the paint. So you really need a floor general to kind of set those guys up if you want them to be effective.
Oh, great points. And you do want that depth, especially for like everything you highlighted, the injury concerns for Mark and the lack of experience at this level, at any level for Khaman, and why not kind of placate both of them? And then my follow up there is the rumors of the Pelicans trade. Do you think that, that what you kind of just hit on with, the value of Khaman and what he could be, is that ultimately why they turned down, as a rumor, there was a rumor they turned down that big Pelicans trade offer of, I think it was a 23 and then the future pick that could be a top 4 pick that ended up being traded to Atlanta to move 10 spots up with the Atlanta Hawks for the Newell Derek Queen trade. So do you think, ultimately the value of Khaman and how they value Khaman is why they turned down such an incredible offer essentially for that pick that became him?
Yeah, I spoke to a Sun source about this, and the way that they explained it to me was that they really liked Maluach. They think he could be a monster. They know it's going to take some time, but they really like this kid's upside. On top of that, they feel like they weren't expecting anyone that could help them to be there at 23. They did like Newell, but they weren't expecting a guy who could come in and make an impact in year 1 to be there at 23. And on top of that, the 2026 pick, you look at it, and whatever the Pelicans are doing, they've had a very funky offseason. I think most of us expect them to be one of the worst teams in the league next year. Even if they have the worst record in the NBA and they have better odds at getting a top 4 pick, because I think next year's draft is there's 4 guys that are at the very top that are going to be really, really good. You look at that, and with the flattened NBA draft lottery odds now, you've seen teams that had the best odds at the number 1 pick fall to 4, 5, 6. So there's no guarantee. It's kind of like the Family Guy, like you could have a boat or you could have the mystery box. It could be anything. It could even be a boat. Like they wanted to just take the boat instead of, well, we could have a top 10 pick, instead of we have a top 10 pick and a guy that we feel if he had stayed in college and been in next year's draft would have been a top 5 candidate anyway. We can get that guy. So instead of having that 2026 pick and taking him with a top 5 pick, we can have a top 10 pick, pay him less on his rookie contract, and just take him now. So I think that was kind of their thinking, and it could very well come back to haunt them if, the Pelicans get the number 1 or the number 2 pick and they get a game-changing player like those guys that are at the top of next year's draft, especially if Maluach doesn't pan out. But they believe that he is going to pan out. So you have to kind of trust the draft evaluation process that got you Ryan Dunn, that got you Oso Ighodaro, that you were able to move up and get Rasheer Fleming. A lot of draft people liked what they've done in the draft and the players they've been able to select. So you really do have to hope that Maluach pans out. But if he does, nobody's going to remember that as much unless, that Pelicans pick turns into a game-changing franchise player.
Absolutely. I mean, I imagine that the Pelicans will be the ones that have to kind of live with that memory of the what if more so than the Suns what if in this scenario for sure. And it is kind of interesting because, I mean, I would imagine the Pelicans only make that trade to begin with if they view Derek Queen in kind of the realm the Suns view Khaman in that value. If you value the guy, it's not mental gymnastics, but it becomes an interesting like logic exercise. Basically, and just on a more zoomed out version of it just really highlights how many different evaluations and processes there are for different teams to me. where one scout could value a guy in the top 5 who's not even in the top 30 on another scout's board, and then you multiply that by the hundreds for all the different scouts, all the different teams who now organize their group of scouts into one building for their main decision maker. And that's just with the teams themselves. That doesn't even count the media, the way that the actual public kind of views these players, hears about these players, learns about these players. Like the public is going to value a guy as a top 10 because they're told he's a top 10 prospect over the last multiple years, but maybe the team doesn't view him that way at all. So it's just an interesting, it's just very interesting team building thought exercise of going through how do you value certain players, certain picks, especially on draft night. And it really comes down to the odds of everything you're saying. And I think that also highlights that, that what's the word, lowering the odds for the taking, that smoothing the odds or whatever it was called, that really might have had an effect on it. That before, I believe it was like 2 or 3 teams had like 25% chance of winning it all, and now it's down to about 13% chance for those top picks. There's a chance you fall all the way down to 7. We saw like the Jazz just did something like this, the last few seasons. But to that point, control what you can control, and they had the decision to hold on to a guy they love, that they value as roughly that value. So it makes a lot of sense when you value it that way. And we'll see. Next year's draft is loaded. I mean, there's so many teams. The Magic or in the Desmond Bane trade have the same type of thing where, like, we love the trade, but we're going to have to see, I guess, the what if of what that pick becomes before we know if we're hurt by the pick or not. Like, whoever gets Darren Peterson is just going to hurt every other team that didn't end up getting him anyway. So there's always that aspect to it too. But it's just super interesting to think about how different teams value all of their different pieces and kind of the draft process of itself. And even to the degree of actually wanting a rookie who can contribute right away, which I think is a relatively rare thing for rookies, but nowadays it's more common, and you're finding more impactful rookies. So the Suns are they obviously want both of these centers to impact the game right away. Backing up a little bit to the Kevin Durant trade, they bring in Jalen Green. We hit on, maybe it looks like more of a Devin Booker run offense, but where does Jalen Green fall into all of these pieces? Like when they make the KD trade, is it just, this is kind of the best individual player and or contract we could find around the league for Kevin Durant, who might still have some value down the line if we want to move on? Or is there some real like belief and also support from Booker that maybe this is his backcourt mate of the future? Maybe these are the guards that he wants to run with, at least for the next year or two.
It's a great question. And it's one that I have conflicting emotions on, because so when they made that trade and when we were evaluating all these different Kevin Durant trade packages, we were literally tiering pieces on our show in terms of potential returning pieces in a Kevin Durant trade, which ones you would want, which ones you don't want. And Jalen Green was near the bottom for me. Like you look at his game, he's an elite shot creator. He can create his own shot from any level of the floor. He is not an elite shot maker from the rim, from the mid-range, from three-point range. Shot creation is a skill in the NBA for sure. He can get downhill. He's athletic. He's still young at 23. And he was a starter for every game that he appeared in for the Houston Rockets, who were the number 2 seed in the West. Like, you don't just fall backwards into something like that. But I think in terms of potential pairings with Devin Booker, it didn't make sense to me, and it still doesn't. And we saw a report from Hoops Hype's Mike Scotto that they had been, evaluating or putting out feelers around the league for potential third teams that might be interested in taking on Jalen Green in case that was part of the Kevin Durant trade. So to not get different people like a Reed Shepherd or a Tari Eason or a Jabari Smith Jr., those were the guys that I think would have made more sense on this Suns team. You come away with Jalen Green. And ever since then, my sources have insisted that they like the fit of Jalen Green with Devin Booker. They view him as an established player who still has a lot of room to grow. And they think that the activity, his athleticism, his dynamism with the ball in his hand, they think that that's going to help Devin Booker. They view him. They said that he's probably going to run the point guard, which for me, I hope means he's just dribbling the ball to half court and then getting it into the hands of their better initiator and creator. But we'll see. I think it'll be kind of a dual ball handler role is what I'm hoping for. And maybe they lean into, Green is athletic and he's very fast. So maybe like we talked about with Jordan Ott wanting to lean into more cutting, that's an area where Jalen Green could be more efficient there. I personally don't see this fit working out well. I think this could be a case of this is what Houston was offering. And so we had to take it. Hopefully we can build Jalen Green's value up and potentially move him, or it just works out somehow and we have this backcourt of the future now. But for me, I'm very skeptical about how it's going to work out. I think it's telling that the Rockets defense was like 8 points per 100 possessions better when Jalen Green was not on the court. So I'm very curious to see how it works. I feel like he's a piece that you kind of want to build his value up and potentially move him for a piece that helps you push closer to contention. But we'll see. That's the exciting part. I am excited to see how that backcourt looks together. I just am very skeptical that it's going to work.
Yeah, and to that point, to kind of combine a few of these ideas, how do you think the new head coach Jordan Ott kind of comes into the fold with maybe specifically this problem? Like, do you see any trends maybe from his previous coaching experience, or just some of the things that he said about how he wants to play that kind of gives you any hope into some of the things you're talking about, where maybe it'll be more Booker running things? Maybe, to me, I actually, one what if that is kind of a total curveball was more a different rookie, Colin Murray Boyles. I personally really liked the fit there with Green and Booker, almost in like, some totally different version of Steph, Clay, and Draymond, of finding like a defensive anchor that can do the playmaking for you. Because I agree, Jalen Green like can create his own shot. Devin Booker can create and make his own shot from anywhere on the floor. I view them as similar enough archetypes where I'd rather have playmakers setting them up to use their off-ball scoring gravity and shooting gravity to stretch the floor a little bit. But that was just an interesting what if. Do you think that we'll see some like front court playmaking? You hit on maybe some handoffs out of somewhere, could be something of the offensive structure. Is there any semblance of what that could look like so far?
Maybe. I think with Jordan Ott's influence, I think you're looking at more of the cutting like we've talked about, which I think Jalen Green could definitely help in that respect. I think you're looking at what the Cavs did with two ball handlers between Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, hopefully able to replicate some of that success. But I do think the Suns kind of put a lot on Devin Booker's plate now. They're saying that Jalen Green's going to be the point guard, but he is nowhere even close to the realm of playmaker that Devin Booker is, who I think last year was double teamed the fifth most out of anyone in the NBA, led the league in secondary assists, led the league in 3-point assists. Like, he's very good at attracting attention, getting off the ball, and letting his teammates capitalize on those 4-on-3, 3-on-2 situations. The problem is he doesn't have Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal anymore in those spots. He has Jalen Green and Mark Williams and guys like that. So there's going to be a lot on his plate in terms of scoring and playmaking. He needs to be the one that's initiating a lot of the offense because he's much better at it than Jalen Green is. Colin Gillespie, when he checks in as that backup point guard, I think he can kind of move Booker off the ball a little bit more. But I am doubtful about how this is all going to work out and the burden that it's going to put on Devin Booker's shoulders, because he's going to have to carry this offense pretty much especially with a lot of younger rookie players. But in terms of front court playmaking, I think Oso is one guy that would make sense there. He's a very good passer, very good decision maker. He makes quick decisions, and he can kind of facilitate as a hub from the elbows, dribble handoffs, that type of thing. And he's a good pick and roll partner as well. So I think we might see some of that. I think with Mark Williams and Khaman Maluach, it's going to be a lot more restricted to pick and rolls, rim dives, that sort of thing. But it'll be interesting to watch because that front court, you've got a lot of bodies there now between Mark Williams, Maluach, Nick Richards, Oso, Rasheer Fleming, who can be a 4 or even a small ball 5. So I think you might see some Oso at the 4 like we saw at Summer League, where you pair him with Khaman Maluach and hope that Maluach can knock down enough threes to make up for Oso's lack of shooting, because Oso definitely has some things to bring to the table, including that front court playmaking, like you mentioned.
Yeah, that aspect is super interesting to see if they can kind of build out some playmaking there, because I was looking through some of the personnel, and now that we're painting the full picture, we got Devin Booker running the O as, let's just give him heliocentric touches. Like if we gave him the Cade Cunningham offense, the Trae Young offense, just go run like 30 pick and rolls, 40 pick and rolls for us. And I do think they have outlined a few other roles, like your rim rolling, rim protecting center to pair in a pick and roll partnership. You have a few of them. There are some standstill shooters. Like, I'm not sure if Rasheer Fleming's going to bring a ton else to the offense, but he can hit the standstill catch and shoot three ball, and at least that's the developmental hope of that D and 3 role that he looks like. Kobe Bray can hit the three ball. We mentioned, Grayson Allen has kind of been in that spot for a while, where his 3-point percentage to me is one of the highest in the league, because you're playing with superstars that get you open threes, and that's what Grayson specializes in as well. So you have him hitting the three ball. Dylan Brooks is there with the defense. I do think that, and he can go off on a random night too. Not that you want him to, but he can on any given night kind of go get his sometimes. So I guess I'm seeing a front court that, best case scenario next season, maybe the front court defense covers up some of Jalen Green's defense or lack thereof in the backcourt. That could be something of a hole to cover up. Maybe Booker, it does take over a lot of these point duties, these half court offensive duties, where, I mean, you said it. He's one of the best scorers and potential 3-point assist guys in the league. Like, he's a one-man offensive. If you want to run the whole offense through him, you just have to kind of rely on his decision-making. But he's proved it, that he can do that as a full-time scoring creator, offensive engine, is kind of that last level that how I view like those superstars that can just create a good play for their team every time down and reliably do it on a night-to-night basis. And you have one in Booker, especially on the offensive side. You've placated him with a deep potential defensive anchors, protect the rim roll, and surrounded them with some D and 3 guys. Like, there is a base like identity here that, maybe some of that identity wasn't there the last few years, or the identity was just more offensive minded. It was more bucket getting minded. So, do you have any hope that, even though you lost some of these stars, maybe there's a little more floor balance almost immediately, or at least in the coming, like in the vicinity, you can see the idea of floor balance like on the horizon now?
Hopefully. There's still too many questions for me to feel confident going into this season. I think this is a 30 to 35 win team right now. Maybe 40 is kind of their ceiling, and flirting with the play-in. I don't think they'll be better than last year, but I think they will have more of an identity, and I think that'll make them more of a pleasant viewing experience, because that 36-win team was probably the most miserable Suns season if you factor in expectations. And I've covered 17, 18, 19-win Suns teams in the recent past. So that team was just so disheartening to watch, because there was so much talent and it should have been so much better than it was. This team, I think expectations are more tempered. So going into the season, you understand this is going to take some time to align. There's a lot riding on some of these younger guys to figure it out, and that's going to take some time. It's unfair to expect 3 rookies coming in, one of whom is on a two-way, to come in and have an immediate impact. Ryan Dunn and Oso Ighodaro, even though they're, I think, the 4th and 5th longest tenured Suns at this point, they're still in their second season. So like, they're going to need to fail as well and learn as well. So I think this team has a better identity. I think they'll play better defense. I think they might be more fun to watch just because of the athleticism and the youth and, some of the poster dunks that we're going to actually get this year. Maybe some alley-oops, God forbid, because this team was near the bottom of the league in alley-oops the last few years since DA left. But I do think they're going to have to figure out a lot. And I think offensively, they're going to need a lot of things to pan out. They're going to need Rasheer Fleming's shooting jump from last year to carry over. They're going to need Dylan Brooks, who had a career year shooting wise, but has historically not been a great 3-point shooter, to hold up. They're going to need, Grayson. He's a guy that's on the trade block, but he's arguably, outside of Devin Booker, the only other guy that you're going to close out hard on from 3-point range. They're going to need an efficiency jump from Jalen Green for sure. So you kind of need a lot of things to fall for this to be a competent offense. And you're relying on a lot of youth defensively, guys that are going to make mistakes. So I think it's going to be a learning process on both ends, but hopefully Jordan Ott is really up to snuff and being able to direct a lot of these younger, more inexperienced players and put them in the right spots.
And do you think that the organization and maybe even the owner, Matt Ishba, now has a little bit more patience for this idea that, new coach, young guys, new rookies, new identity, Booker is still here and happy. Like we didn't upset him through all this. We gave him what he wanted, I think, with some of these moves. So, do they have the opportunity now where maybe you're in the Western Conference? There's a lot of great teams out there. Things got to go really right just to have like a fighting chance. Is it more okay expectations wise to take a year back? And forgive me, do they have their pick next year? If things go south, is that out the door? Because I know a lot of trades have gone down to follow some of the picks around. So are you aware off the top of your head kind of what the pick situation looks like that you could share?
Yeah, so their pick is either going to, I believe, Memphis or Washington this upcoming season. It's a pick. They owe it outright, so they do not have a pick in the upcoming draft. So yeah, this season is not really, if it goes south, you can't really just fully ride into it. But I do think there is maybe more patience. I think this is Matt Ishbia's biggest test as an owner, because he did say it during exit interviews. If I see a vision and we're all aligned in it, that's the big buzzword here in Phoenix is alignment. If we're all aligned in it and we see the vision, we see the playing style, we see them playing to an identity, like, of course, I'm going to be more patient. But the last couple of years, you trade for Kevin Durant, you trade for Bradley Beal, you are obviously all in on that. And you are doing everything in your power to make that work. They did. It didn't work. They pivoted. So now is kind of our first real test. Like, okay, this team is potentially out of the luxury tax. They're out of the tax aprons now. They have more flexibility. What are they going to do with that? They have a lot of younger players, but established ones. Like I mentioned, Mark Williams, Jalen Green, both 23. So you got younger, but you have players that can help you compete now. They are retooling, so they're not rebuilding because they don't have the draft capital to rebuild anyway. So are you going to have the patience if this is a 30-win team? If this is a team that, Devin Booker goes down for 30 games and you're less than 30 wins, are you going to have the patience for it? I think this is his first real test, but based on what has been said, they understand that they're not competing for championships this year. They are trying to get this thing back on the rails so that, by the time Booker is 30, 31, which is 1 to 2 seasons from now, they're back on that path to potentially being able to contend again.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to kind of see it play out and see the patience that whether or not it comes through. And I think that the new owner kind of idea, not new anymore, but that idea, it happens a lot where new owners come in and mix things up sometimes and maybe hit the big red button a little too fast, and you got to reset. But I think what at least stood out to me is that you just keep he was not afraid to admit, like, I made a mistake, or I went too hard too fast with some of these moves. And maybe you can't just buy a championship team. Like, you can buy a lot of other things in every other business when things go wrong. Like, it's different in basketball, in the business of basketball. Like, it's not as easy as throwing money at it and like figuring everything out that way necessarily as the team building process of it all. And there were obviously things out of the control that you mentioned that, like, had Bradley Beal just been healthy for this whole stretch, what would that have looked like? And he had some untapped, like, point guard things that maybe he could have been doing as something of a sixth man with more offensive, maybe with a different coach. You have a little more offensive ingenuity or more modern offensive schemes that get the most out of these guys. So there's a lot of different what ifs and question marks, and it's not just one thing. But I like a handful of the moves, especially bringing in Khaman and Mark Williams to double down talent wise. Like, you have some, like, real defensive anchor potential centers to build with Booker, and that's pretty much got to be on near the top of the list of what you want to pair with Booker is a defensive anchor who just brings something offensively that doesn't get him run off the floor. If he's filling a rim roller role, which you hit on as well. I do think Khaman has a little bit of a 3-point shot potential. Like I don't think that's out of the question that he could be a shooter down the line too. Something he didn't really get to flash at Duke, but
Mm-hmm.
that's some room to grow. That he could be a pick and pop guy too, which takes his game out to another level. So really like that move. And we'll go from here. And one last shout to the finals team themselves. Like I really enjoyed watching the Suns team that made the finals. Like it felt like one of Chris Paul's like best years. I think he finished top 5 MVP voting, or maybe it was the fifth place or something like that. But like that just felt like Chris Paul got he makes every team better that he's a part of, and that was one of the ultimate examples of just like a perfect mix of floor balance with like Mikal Bridges defensive to me. Like I thought he was defensive player of the year worthy on the wing. This big wing stopper. Cam Johnson early in his showing how scalable he can be in his. Maybe he looks a little more like that in Denver than he did in Brooklyn, where he got more touches and kind of scales down his role a little bit. DeAndre Ayton, just a really fun team. So just wanted to shout out that team as well, because it's crazy how quick the league changes. I mean, you would think that team is not going to change and they're set with that core for a long time. And here we are a few years later, they've already changed cores like 2 or 3 times and are back on the way up. So you just never know in this league, but I wanted to give them a shout because that was a really fun moment in time. And it didn't happen overnight. Like that Suns team took years to build as well and to get breaking barriers to get some playoff experience. So shout out to that team. And just wondering if you had any kind of like favorite memories from that team, covering the team and just being in Phoenix during that time.
Yeah, it was last year's team was interesting because they were not good and you could tell that guys were frustrated, but they said that they all got along well. Going back to those 2021, 22 teams, you could feel the chemistry difference. Like those guys genuinely liked each other. They liked playing together. They were good playing together. And it was interesting because it all started with the bubble, going 8-0 in that bubble, and that being what kind of attracted Chris Paul to Devin Booker and to Phoenix. And then that next year, they start off 8-8. It's looking a little rough, and they wind up going to the finals. And that was, for pretty much all of them, except for Chris Paul, their first time in the playoffs at all. It was Phoenix's first time in the playoffs since 2010. And you couple that with it being the first time that fans can be back in the building during the pandemic. And it was just a powder keg. Like I've never covered a playoff run or a team like that, because every single game there was some memorable moment or fan interaction or something that happened on the court. And a lot of those guys on that team became fan favorites for life because of it. Like the alley-oop was obviously the big one, but even something like Torrey Craig's alley-oop against the Nuggets and Suns in 4 and all this stuff. And it's just a sad reminder because everything felt like it was lining up for the Suns that year. It felt like it was like ordained for them, and you just fall short in the finals. And you look at that now, they win 64 games the next season, but they lose to Luka Doncic, the guy they could have drafted in the second round, in one of the most bizarre meltdowns I've ever seen. And it's just a reminder of how quick it can all fall apart, how quickly you can fall from that mountaintop, even though it felt like that was a team that should have won a title. And now Devin Booker is the only remaining member from those teams. It's kind of sad, but those playoff runs and that 64-win season were just unmatched in terms of what I've been able to cover on the Suns beat, for sure.
Hey, you get all-time moments like the alley-oop, and one of the only times it happened reminded me of my favorite in-person moment just as a fan with my family, catching it was actually the same exact type of play, Hedo Turkoglu alley-oop to Dwight Howard against the Spurs, Tim Duncan Spurs in like 07 or something, but I remember it so vividly. It's because it's my favorite in-person sporting moment ever with my family, but also it just felt like the moment when the Magic like were put on the map at that time, and like we are truly contenders. Like this was the game that announced this team is for real, and that's just like an all-time memory. And I'm sure the alley-oop is remembered similarly for Phoenix fans around that time. And that lineup to me is just one of the ultimate examples of floor balance, of like ideal floor balance, where you check off like every role you could possibly imagine and do it in a complementary sense on both sides, where there's very few holes to either side. And obviously you can like every player in lineup has something that can improve a little bit. But like when you just cross off, like you have your main scorer and your main big man, and the two-way balance of a Mikal Bridges depoy wing kind of covering everyone up with an anchor in Ayton as well, and Cam Johnson, a strong defender, Chris Paul, one of the smartest defenders ever. And then you also have him orchestrating the offense with Devin Booker's incredible scoring gravity, Ayton as a lob threat who can also post up a little bit back then. And they were getting the most out of Ayton in my mind. Like they like invigorated him to be as agile and mobile and effort that I had seen. So I got you.
Yeah, and like Chris Paul got the most out of him, and Jay Crowder was an underrated part of that team too. The guy who threw the valley oop and was pivotal on both ends as a veteran leader. So just a really fun team all around.
Jay Crowder helps like every team he's a part of. It reminds me a little bit of the Chris Paul's Rockets as well, with Harden and Capella and Ariza and some of that floor balance of it all. Just wanted to give them a shout. They're just an all-time fun team. So you gotta remember the good times, and shout out. Credit to Booker for kind of sticking through all of it, being a team guy, and still happy to be here, and like there's no sign otherwise. And I just like to see that from stars sometimes too, where they're able to kind of put up with the ups and downs of a team because they're both sharing that ultimate goal. They're aligned, with the vision of Phoenix going forward. That's exactly what you want, is vertical alignment, integration from the owner to the coach to the GM to the star player, being on the same same wavelength, having the same goal. So did you have anything you wanted to plug here at the end, Gerald? I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little Phoenix Suns today and just learn more about what's going on in Phoenix and kind of how the team looks going forward and what their plan is like going forward. So you have anything to plug before we head out?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in more Sun stuff, my work is over at gophnx.com. You can check out our podcast. We go 5 days a week, the PHNX Suns podcast. It's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Gerald Bourguet.
Perfect. You guys got to shoot him a follow. Keep up on all things Phoenix, all things Suns, and see how this season plays out. I'm just excited to see kind of which young guys pop out that we're not expecting, that become very important pieces to next year's team, because you just never know where it's going to pop up, especially with a front court as loaded and with this many question marks. I think it could just go a few different ways, and a guy like Oso could pop out and be like the second most important Sun next year because he's doing everything that the team needs, and they're in a situation where guys are going to have to wear different hats, try different things, experiment different lineups, and it'll be pretty cool to see where the identity really goes from here, because I think that's ultimately what the Suns fans and what the organization want, is just a plan and an identity around Devin Booker of how this team is going to get back into the playoffs to contending around D-Book for the foreseeable future, especially while he's in his prime. He wants to be here. Let's build a contender, build a winner. And I can't wait to see how it plays out. So thanks for hopping on, Gerald. It's a lot of fun talking hoops today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Have to do it again sometime. Have a good one, Joe.
With Ryan.
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.